I didn't argue when my brother told me not to come. The phone pressed to my ear felt heavy, as if grief itself had a weight, and his voice kept flattening the air between us until it was just static and judgment. He said the words carefully, like a doctor giving a diagnosis he enjoyed delivering. "You shouldn't attend the funeral," Daniel said. "You make the family uncomfortable." I stared through my office window as the city's afternoon light slid off the black glass of the opposite tower. I built 3 of those buildings. You would think glass reflects truth, but it only throws your image back at you, polished and silent. Somewhere in the distance, a street violinist dragged a bow across the strings and pulled a sound I could feel in my throat. I thought of my mother's hands, the faint scent of vanilla from the lotion she used, the way she folded towels the same way she folded apologies, small, careful squares that could be stacked and hidden. "Understood," I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. Calm, professional, signed and delivered. "I won't go." He waited for me to protest. When I didn't, he exhaled a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "It's better this way," he said. "Let things be peaceful." Peaceful. People love that word when they mean convenient. After we hung up, I turned off the lights and stood in the dark. The models on the shelves were shadows, a set of miniature cranes, a perfect little truss bridge, a scale mock-up of the first condo tower I ever won in a bid against men who had been playing the game long before I learned the rules. Below, the street moved like a conveyor belt of tiny lives. I remember the night I took the call from a bank manager who used to pretend not to hear my name correctly. That night he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Cortez," in a tone that tasted like metal. That was the night I knew I could bend steel without touching it. I should have been at the funeral. I should have been there because I was her son. I should have been there because at 14 I took a dishwashing job to keep the lights on, then a night shift loading trucks, so Daniel could sleep before school, then a foreman's job on a site no one wanted because the ground was broken and the blueprints lied. I should have been there because I paid the property taxes on her little house for 20 years and never said a word. Because when she needed a ramp after the stroke, it was poured by my crew before sunrise, so no neighbor could pity her. But I didn't go. I stayed home, and the city went quiet in a way only a city can go quiet, where the silence has sirens hiding in it. That morning, I made coffee the way she taught me. Stovetop, not machine. I could hear the low hiss, smell the bitter edge. I stood in the kitchen in a suit I didn't put on, tie in my hand, and listened to the brewing like it was a clock counting my failures. When it finished, I poured it just shy of the rim, then left it steaming untouched. I sat at the table and set the tie down in a neat coil, like a sedated snake. People imagine success as a ladder. Mine was a scaffolding. Every rung built on nights no one saw, on favors that didn't look like favors, on risks that looked like foolishness. When I got my first contract, Daniel said I was lucky. When I got my 5th, he said I was ruthless. By the time I was building skylines with signatures, he stopped saying anything at all unless there was a family barbecue or a holiday that needed a bill paid. He had a smile that never included the eyes, a polished suburban life with stainless steel appliances, and a wife who used the word boundaries like it was a trophy. "Boundaries," she'd say, offering me kale salad as if goodness had a flavor. "They're healthy." Healthy is another convenient word. It means keep your help coming, but your presence minimal. There is a ceremony to exclusion. It begins with a quiet suggestion you're too busy anyway. It continues with smiles that are almost sincere. It ends with instructions delivered like mercy. You shouldn't attend the funeral. I didn't tell him that 3 nights earlier I sat beside Ma's hospital bed and looked at the window's black reflection and pretended it was a lake, the kind we never visited, because Daniel got carsick. The heart monitor made a metronome out of the dark. She was sleeping, mouth slightly open, breathing like she was tasting air before allowing it in. I took a cloth and wiped her hands gently, one finger at a time, because that is what you do for the hands that held your face when you lied about how much the rent was. That is what you do for the hands that pressed your shoulders and said I know even when they didn't. She woke for a moment, eyes clearer than they had been in days. She said, "Mijo, your father's watch." There was no watch. He left us with a busted Chevelle and a set of excuses, so fragile even he didn't believe them by the last day. But she liked to assign meaning to objects we never owned, a way of making our story feel like an heirloom instead of survival. Still, I played along, the way you do when someone you love is making inventory of things that can't be stolen. "It's safe," I said. "I'll wear it Sunday." She smiled like it was true, patted my hand, and drifted away again. On the morning of the funeral, I opened my closet and looked at the gray suit I wear when the city requires me to be an adult among adults. I moved it aside and found the old jacket from the winter. I sealed the deal over hot dogs in a parking lot because the client didn't want to be seen with me. That jacket smelled faintly of engine oil and rain. I hung it back in place and closed the door. I wanted to go. I did not go. Not because my brother forbade it, but because I had grown tired of performing respect so that others could feel comfortable with their pieties. I wasn't going to argue for permission to grieve. The ceremony went on without me. I know because a photo arrived later, uninvited. A family friend texted it without a message, the way you send a weather report. Daniel in a black suit, his wife looking small and perfect. The pastor's hand lifted in a gentleness that could be mistaken for blessing. The church's stained glass threw colors over the pews like confetti that didn't know what party it had been invited to. My mother's casket was a closed quiet in the center of the frame. I don't keep many photos on my phone. Buildings are too tall for phones to hold. But I kept that one. Not as a wound, as a receipt. 3 days later we were all summoned to an attorney's office that smelled like leather chairs and practiced courtesy. The will was to be read. Daniel sat on the left, his wife beside him, fingers entwined like they were holding one thought together. Across the room, a cousin I barely recognized stared at a painting that had to be expensive because it made no effort to be beautiful. I sat by the window and watched rain freckle the sill. The attorney, a thin man with a voice like a closing door, cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. I'll be brief." Brief. People love that word when they want to make sure you cannot interrupt what is about to happen. He talked through formalities like they were hills he had to roll words over. Then he looked at me. "Your mother left a letter to be read aloud." The room found a new stillness, the kind that holds its breath. He unfolded a single sheet and read. My mother's words were simple and exact. She never wasted anything, least of all sentences. "Daniel," the letter said, "you have your father's smile. I always loved that about you. Please remember to soften it with kindness. I leave you the house. It was never the walls or roof that made it home. It was your laughter in the kitchen when you were little. Fill it with that again. And listen to your wife, but also listen to the quiet." My brother exhaled as if a knot had loosened in him. His wife pressed his hand like a seal. Then the attorney lifted his eyes again and continued. "To my eldest, to my steady one, to the son who held the world on his back and never asked to put it down, I leave what I have saved. Not because money means peace, but because I watched you buy peace for us when it was not for sale." He paused. No one moved. "I leave the savings account at First Harbor in its entirety to you, along with the certificate of deposit and the small trust established from the sale of the lot on Rainer. I also leave the contents of the safe deposit box and the letters within. You will know what to do with them." The room began to tilt. Daniel's wife blinked twice, as if clearing dust from her lashes. The attorney wasn't finished. I leave my blessing to the one who already carried it. Use it to finish what you start, but also to forgive yourself when you cannot finish everything. The watch is yours as well. You will find it where time kept us together. He folded the letter. Silence rearranged itself into geometry. Daniel's smile had evacuated his face. He searched the attorney's eyes for some clerical mercy. "What account?" he said, trying to be casual and not landing anywhere near it. "What trust? What lot?" The attorney rested both hands on the desk, the universal posture of people who have no stake in your emotions. "Your mother sold the Rayner lot 12 years ago," he said. "She set aside the proceeds." "What proceeds?" Daniel said. It wasn't a question. It was the first time he had ever been told there were rooms in our house he had never stepped into. "My mother never owned the lot. I did. I bought it in her name when land was cheap and faith was cheaper. I paid the taxes. I cleaned the weeds myself on Sundays when the city wore its tired face. And years later, when she needed help I couldn't argue with, I sold it and put the money where she would not feel ashamed of taking it. I gave the attorney instructions without ever sitting in his office. I made quiet arrangements like a man building a bridge in fog." Daniel's wife shifted in her seat. "This isn't fair," she said. She used the tone people use when fairness has recently begun to matter to them. "Fair is that he got to say goodbye," I said, and let the words land. "Fair is that I paid for the hospice nurse you praised on Facebook. Fair is that I stayed out of your peaceful funeral." She inhaled sharply, then looked at the attorney as if he could call security on grief. He pressed on, unaffected. "There is one final clause," he said. Daniel lifted his head. "The house is left to Daniel with the stipulation that the lien your mother obtained is acknowledged and satisfied before any sale or transfer." "What lien?" Daniel said. His voice had a new pitch. He looked at me the way a man looks at a locked door he didn't know was locked. The attorney turned a page. "Your mother took a small lien on the property to secure the funds paid into arrears 4 winters ago. The documentation names the lender as a private party and requires clearance upon disposition. 4 winters ago, Daniel had almost lost the house. He'd called me the week after Christmas using his gentle voice, asking how I was doing, how the buildings were, how the city treated me. The second beer opened somewhere in the middle of the call. He mentioned the bank like it was a weather system. I sent the money with a note that said do better. He sent a text that said thank you. His wife sent a casserole and a quote about gratitude over a photo of a sunset. I filed the receipt and forgot the casserole under a stack of contracts until it was too late to be edible. The attorney closed the folder. That is all. It wasn't. Not even close. The will had not given me anything I hadn't already given away. What it did give me was the one thing I had not allowed myself in years: clarity. In that room, with rain ticking the window like a second hand, I understood the shape of the silence I had maintained and the cost of keeping it. Daniel stood. He smoothed his tie with both hands the way you do when you need time to think, but have none. He looked at me like I was a stranger who resembled his brother. "You should have told me," he said. "I did," I said. "You just liked the story better when it was yours." He didn't have a reply for that. He left, his wife in tow, her perfume lingering like a polite threat. The cousin lingered awkwardly, then followed them. The attorney began to shuffle papers into the kind of order you only learn from doing it every day. I stayed seated, watching the wet city harden into evening. Somewhere below, a bus sighed and pulled away from a curb. Somewhere above, clouds made decisions I could not see. When I finally stood, my chair legs scraped the polished floor with a small sound that felt like a beginning. I slipped the copy of the will into an envelope. There was a key inside as well, narrow and serious. The safe deposit box. Contents and letters. You will know what to do with them. I walked out into the hallway and felt the cool of the marble through the leather soles of my shoes. I could smell the faint lemon of the floor polish. The elevator chimed like a memory. Inside, I pressed a button for the lobby and watched the doors slide toward each other with precision. For once the mirror did not return my face. It returned a map. The shape of what had to happen next sketched itself in the reflection's edges. I didn't attend the funeral. I attended the reading of the will. That was enough. It was more than enough. The silence between those two events is where the story really began. The night after the will, the city hummed like an old refrigerator. Constant, capable of forgetting itself. Noisy in a way the ear surrenders to. I didn't turn on music. I let the apartment breathe. I walked the rooms with a glass of water I never drank from and ran my hand along the back of the sofa, the cool polished edge of the dining table, the spine of a book I wasn't reading. Every object made a noise when touched, soft as a confession. I sat by the window and watched the light of the river stiffen into a band of pewter. People think the worst part of humiliation is public. It isn't. It's private. It's the moment you understand the performance you've been participating in and how much of yourself you traded for the role. In my case, the role had a name: dependable. The man you call when your tire is flat and your pride is too. The man who remembers your children's birthdays even when you don't. The man who bothers to check the pilot light and the roof before the storm. The one who smells the gas leak before anyone else. Memory is a house you can only enter backward. I opened the front door and found myself at 14 again, the kitchen light revealing the pattern in the vinyl floor we never replaced. The lemon dish, soap keeping the illusion of cleanliness afloat. My mother stood at the sink washing the same cup twice, tired enough to confuse the day's end with its beginning. Daniel sat at the table with a comic book, mouthing dialogue silently like a prayer. I took my first job because the rent stared at me from the counter like a bill someone had underlined with a knife. The sink water smelled like pennies. The walls kept secrets in the insulation. I learned how to whistle, without sound, so I wouldn't wake her when I got home late. Back in the present, the glass left a ring on the side table. A perfect wet circle. I wiped it with my sleeve and felt ridiculous. You can build towers and still be brought to attention by a water ring. 3 messages blinked on my phone. 2 from people who wanted to know if I was okay in the tone that meant please do not tell me if you are not. 1 from Daniel. It said, "You made a scene." I laughed. The sound startled me. At the will reading, I said 9 words. Fair is that he got to say goodbye. Fair is. That was the scene. 9 words are a lot if you prefer your illusions intact. I set the phone face down, then face up again, as if that would change anything. I thought of the safe deposit box key in the envelope, contents and letters. I wondered how many letters can live inside a box meant for jewelry and passports. I pictured my mother writing at the kitchen table, her pen scratching like a soft animal at the door. She kept lists of everything: groceries, birthdays, TV shows she wanted to remember. She made lists because the world had done a poor job of being dependable for her. I had inherited the habit and given it a suit and a project manager. On the balcony, the air smelled like rain exhaust. Somewhere below, a man laughed too loudly, part relief, part advertisement. Across the street, a woman was closing her blinds, slow, deliberate, the way you fold a blanket for the last time. I tried to imagine my mother's voice if I had called her after Daniel told me to stay away from the funeral. She would have said, "No, me, Joe, let them be." Then she would have added, "Come by in the evening," and I'll make coffee. Sweets. She called dessert sweets, even when it was a single cookie wrapped in plastic, like a favor from a party we weren't invited to. I stood there until the metal railing left a chill across my palms. The lines in my hands looked deeper in the night. My father's hands were always a rumor in our house. He taught me one useful thing before he left: how to strike a match in wind. You use your body as a wall, you create a pocket of stillness, and then fire becomes possible. The oldest lessons are always about building small shelters around fragile heat. At 2 in the morning, I finally slept. I dreamed of tile floors. Not ours. Hospital tiles. The kind that shine in places that make you suspicious of shine. In the dream, I followed a nurse's shoes, the squeak-squeak rhythm exact as a metronome. We turned a corner and there was a door with a sign that read watch repair. When I opened it, my mother sat at a desk disassembling a wristwatch one gear at a time, setting each piece in a saucer like it was a slice of lemon. She looked up at me and said, "It's safe. I'll wear it Sunday." Then she laughed, and it sounded like the clink of a spoon against china. I woke up with a taste of old coffee in my mouth and the knowledge that the box couldn't wait. The bank opened at 9. By 8:40, I was on the sidewalk outside First Harbor, my breath making small clouds in the early cold. The building's brass handles were polished to a shine that felt almost insulting. Inside, the air carried the faint cologne of money and lavender hand soap. An assistant with a tidy bun guided me to a small room with a table and no windows. She spoke with the precise politeness you reserve for someone who might be a donor. When the box arrived, the guard slid it onto the table and left me alone. Gray metal. The weight of secrets is always heavier than the container. I fitted the key and turned it. The lock yielded with a sound that felt like an old sentence finally ending. Inside, there were 3 things. First, a small velvet pouch that could have been jewelry and wasn't. Second, a stack of envelopes bound with thin brown twine, the top one addressed to me in the handwriting that made me who I am. The ink had bled slightly around the curves of the letters, like the paper had been crying before I had the chance. Third, a folded document with a county seal. I opened the pouch first because it felt like a challenge. Inside was a watch. Not my father's. A modest little thing with a leather band and a face that had seen better wrists. On the back, scratched shallowly by someone who didn't know how to engrave, were the words, "Keep time gentle." It was not about value. It was about instruction. I set it on the table and picked up the document. It was the lien agreement. My name disguised as a private note, my signature absent on purpose, my mother's careful initials on each page like footprints across snow. Attached was a thin receipt, a payment made from an account. Not hers. Mine, scrubbed of identity. A neat ledger of a rescue no one was supposed to mention. I placed the papers down and reached for the stack of letters. The twine yielded under my thumb. The top envelope had my name. I breathed in, set it flat, and opened it with a careful tear. Her voice arrived on the page. "Me, Joe. If you are reading this, it means I am listening to you from the room where everyone finally believes me when I say you were a good boy. I know you don't need to be told, but I needed to say it where you could not interrupt me with duty. I did not make the world easy. I made you carry too much. I asked for help without asking. The house was heavy. Your brother was light. He floated. You learned to be the anchor. Anchors get no parades, but ships don't leave the harbor without them. In this box, there are other letters. Some are for me to feel brave, some for you to know what I knew, and one for Daniel. Please give him his when you are ready to forgive him for being the baby for too long. I did not teach him to grow in the ways you grew. That is on me. You once asked me if I kept secrets. I told you no. I lied. I kept the secret that the land was yours. I insisted it be in my name because I wanted to leave you something even if the world took what you were building. Then you sold it for me and tricked me into thinking I had helped myself. You have always done that. You make other people's strength look like their own. You do not have to keep doing it. If Daniel forbids you from the funeral, I hope you decide to do what makes your heart quiet. Funerals are for the living. You have done the living for all of us. If he welcomed you, I hope you sat in the second row where you always prefer to be invisible. In either case, here is what matters. I saw you. Every day. Even when I was looking away, I saw you. Use what is here to make the balance true. You will know what that means. And wear the watch when you need to be slow. It loses 2 minutes a day. Let it. Time can afford it. Con amor. Ma. I held the paper with both hands until the edges softened under my thumbs. I don't cry the way other people cry. Years of being the problem solver taught me to convert tears into decisions. But a single drop did fall onto the word quiet and made the T dot look like a candle flame. Under her letter were more. One addressed to Daniel. One addressed to me again, labeled only if you can't forgive. Several more addressed to names I recognized from a neighborhood that doesn't exist anymore, except in the way a street corner can smell like the past if you walk by at dusk. I did not open any of them. Not yet. I put Ma's letter back in its envelope and placed it over my heart like a patch. There are sounds your body makes when it decides something. For me, it is a slow settling in the chest, like concrete curing. Not hard. Resolute. The decision was not broad. It was precise. I would stop being the invisible machinery that kept other people's illusions running on schedule. I would stop subsidizing the lie that Daniel was the son my mother leaned on because of some invisible hierarchy of love I was too proud to correct. I would tell the truth, and I would design the telling like a structure that cannot fall. And I would do it in a way that made the word fair mean something other than decoration. I put the watch on. It sat light on my wrist, a borrowed future. I cleaned up the papers and rang the little bell on the desk. The assistant returned, too bright, too practiced. All set, she asked. For now, I said. On the sidewalk, the air had a brightness to it, the kind that follows rain even when the clouds haven't let go yet. A bus gusted past and left the smell of diesel, hot and oddly clean. A man sold umbrellas no one needed. I walked to the corner cafe and stood in line behind a woman who hummed the same bar of a song over and over, the way grief loops itself when it doesn't know what else to do. At a table near the window, I set the watch face up and watched it lose nothing. I opened my notebook and drew 3 boxes. My handwriting is a builder's handwriting, square, unadorned, able to be read from across a site, while a crane is moving something dangerous. I labeled the boxes, truth, proof, stage. Truth, the payments I made, the lien, the land, the hospice nurse, the utilities, the tuition for Daniel's second attempt at community college that ended when he discovered beer pong and declared himself an entrepreneur without a product. Proof, receipts, bank wire confirmations, the lien document, emails with timestamps, the letter in my pocket, the list Ma kept under the phone of who brought what casserole when. Stage, the place where the story would be told and made undeniable. A family gathering was too small. Social media was too cheap. Court was too slow, unless I needed it for punctuation. What I needed was a place Daniel cared about more than truth and almost as much as his image. Church, or his neighborhood association, where he was vice chair and wore a polo shirt the color of authority. A fly touched down on the rim of my coffee cup, reconsidered, and left. I wrote 2 more words, timing. Witnesses. The watch ticked like a small animal breathing. I set it 5 minutes behind on purpose. If time was going to try to teach me anything, I would let it start with humility. When I stood, I felt taller. Not larger. Just correctly measured. I left a tip big enough to matter and walked out into a city that finally felt like it was made of rooms I could enter face first. I had been humiliated. I had been excluded. I had been thanked with casseroles. Now I would become something else. Not the villain. Not the hero. The architect. And what I was going to build would not fall. The morning after opening the safe deposit box, I woke before dawn. The city was still wearing its night face. Lights in distant towers blinked lazily, like heavy eyes refusing to open fully. My apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls listening, the air holding something that hadn't decided whether to settle or break. I made coffee, but didn't drink it. Instead, I walked to the window and watched the river absorb the first hint of light. I've spent my entire life calculating forces. Wind loads, dead weights, lateral pressure. When you build, you learn early. Every structure has a breaking point. You don't design to avoid it, you design to control where it happens. So when the stress comes, the failure is contained. You choose the beam that bends but doesn't snap, the joint that yields at the exact right time. I realized that morning. My family had been treating me like their invisible beam for decades. Daniel leaned. His wife balanced on what she couldn't build. My mother trusted. And I allowed it because control was easier than confrontation. My breaking point hadn't been the phone call banning me from the funeral. It wasn't the will reading either. It was that letter. Her words. You do not have to keep doing it. That was the moment the structure shifted. I dressed slowly, not in my usual tailored suits. I pulled out an old black sweater, jeans, boots, the kind of clothes I wore when I was still climbing scaffolding instead of signing checks. There's a kind of clarity that only old clothes give you. The smell of steel, the echo of early mornings, the reminder that everything you have can be built again. I drove to the old neighborhood, the one Daniel calls unsafe now when he wants to impress his suburban neighbors. The streets were still wet from a late-night drizzle. Storefronts wore their metal shutters like eyelids. I parked outside the corner cafe that used to be a laundromat and ordered nothing. I just stood there, breathing in the scent of yeast and exhaust. Across the street stood the house I grew up in, peeling paint, roof patched in a dozen places. The ramp I poured after her stroke still solid as the day I laid it. I hadn't been here since she passed. Not really. I'd driven by once. Fast. Like someone checking their reflection in a shop window. But this morning, I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front gate. My boots crunched against gravel she always meant to replace, but never did. The sound of that gravel was a time machine. I saw myself at 16, pushing Daniel's bicycle up the path because his legs were too tired after practice. At 21, carrying lumber through this gate because I couldn't afford storage, and Ma didn't complain about the mess. At 33, fixing the roof with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other, because she didn't trust electricians. And I saw Daniel at all those ages too, always arriving when the work was done. The breaking point isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the soft realization that a lifetime of small cuts finally outlines a map. I leaned against the gate and exhaled slowly. I wasn't angry the way I used to be, wild, hot, unfocused. This was different. Clean. Cold. Architectural. My revenge wouldn't be petty. It wouldn't be cruel. It would be structural. I was going to redesign the entire narrative of our family, piece by piece. As the sun rose, the house's shadows retreated. The windows reflected light like truth refusing to hide anymore. I pulled out my phone and opened a folder I'd been building for years without knowing why. Every payment receipt, transfer, construction permit. photo of projects tied to this house. Decades of evidence, quietly filed away. And for the first time, I thought, this isn't just proof. It's a blueprint. That night, Daniel called me. "I need to talk," he said. His voice was cautious, like someone testing ice. "I'm listening." "About the will. About the house. There's clearly stuff I didn't know." "That's true," I said evenly. "Look, I didn't mean to exclude you the way it happened. It was just tension, you know? People." "You told me not to come," I reminded him. "Yeah, but—" "No," I cut him off. "Not yeah, but. You said I made the family uncomfortable." He was silent. I could hear his wife in the background, whispering. A TV muted, but flashing light. The sound of a refrigerator door closing. "What are you going to do with the money?" he finally asked. There it was. Not apology. Not reflection. The question of control. "I haven't decided yet," I said. "But I do know one thing." "What?" "I'm done being invisible." He laughed nervously. "What does that mean?" "You'll find out." I hung up. The line between endurance and retaliation had been crossed. Not because of rage, because of precision. This was no longer about feelings. This was a design problem. And I've never met a design problem I couldn't solve. I opened Ma's letter again. Use what is here to make the balance true. Balance, not vengeance. Justice measured like steel beams in tension. I started writing names, dates, events. Not on my laptop. On paper. Ink on white. No deletions. Just the clean architecture of what was owed and what was hidden. I thought about Daniel's position in his neighborhood association. How he boasted about community leadership. How every barbecue became a stage where he played the responsible younger brother, the suburban success story. How he used my quiet generosity as invisible scaffolding for his reputation. That would be the stage. I thought about timing, anniversaries, church events, community meetings, when the right ears would be listening, when the right eyes would be watching. That would be the reveal. I thought about witnesses, not allies, witnesses, people who had unknowingly benefited from my work. The priest who thanked Daniel for the ramp he never built. The neighbor who thought Daniel paid for the new siding. The hospice nurse who assumed Daniel handled the bills. They would become part of the structure. When you build a skyscraper, you don't just pick materials. You study wind, traffic, shadows, how the building will live inside the city. My revenge required the same. Not a hammer, a blueprint. I sat in my dim kitchen, papers spread out like blueprints on a drafting table. I circled 3 dates, drew arrows between names, jotted notes in the margins the way my foreman used to mark potential weak points. The man they called dependable had left the room. The architect had entered, and what was coming would not be loud at first. It would be quiet, like steel bending in slow motion. Then, when the weight shifted, everything they took for granted would be exposed. This was the breaking point. I started where any good structure begins, with load paths. If Daniel's reputation stood on anything, it wasn't his character. It was the perception of it. In his neighborhood association, perception was everything. He liked to stand in front of a projector screen with a laser pointer and call himself a steward of property values. In that room, he was the responsible brother, the suburban statesman, the man who took care of his mother's needs without ever naming the hands that carried the weight. That was the load-bearing wall. Remove it properly, and the whole house tilts. I laid the blueprint on my kitchen table. 3 columns in tight black ink. Truth proof, stage. Under stage, I wrote the words Neighborhood Association. Under proof, I drew boxes around key items, then numbered them. 1. Lien agreement with my mother's initials. 2. Wire confirmations for the mortgage arrears 4 winters ago. 3. Hospice invoices paid through my company's foundation. 4. Photos and permits for the ramp and repairs I'd done at the house. 5. Bank letter for the land sale, proceeds directed to the trust. 6. My mother's letter, the line about balance underlined twice. Truth didn't need bullets. Truth was already beating in the room like a second heart. I made a list of people who, by simply telling the truth, could become witnesses without ever entering a courtroom. Marjorie Kim, Association President, serious about bylaws, allergic to impropriety. Trevor Lane, Treasurer, accountant, quiet, insomnia eyes, keeps receipts like memories. Pastor Ruiz, not part of the association, but respected by half the room. Nurse Albright Hospice, carried my mother down the ramp the day she asked to see the sky. You don't win a structure by shouting at the beams. You win by setting the conditions under which the beams must perform. That meant getting onto the meeting agenda without Daniel smelling smoke. I called Marjorie first. She answered on the second ring, brisk and polite. This is Marjorie. Good afternoon. My name is Marco Cortez. I'm a contractor and developer. I'd like to request 5 minutes on the next agenda for a community update about elder care ramps and safety standards. I'll bring photographs and permit references, and I'll have a brief donation announcement. The words were chosen with care. She loved safety standards and donations more than speeches. We only allow non-residents when there's motion, she said. I understand, I said. I also believe one of your vice chairs benefited from those standards quite profoundly, and the community might like to hear how to access similar help. Silence. I could hear her thinking, the paper shuffling in her mind. We can create a brief item, she conceded. 3 minutes. I'll use 2, I said. There are small victories that tell you the blueprint is sound. Getting on the agenda was 1. The second came 15 minutes later, when Trevor the treasurer returned my call. I don't usually respond to numbers I don't know, he said, voice soft, careful. I'm calling on behalf of my mother, I said. She lived on Beechwood. I remember her, he said immediately. Small, funny. She brought cookies to the coat drive. Those cookies were store-bought, I said, and the corner of his voice warmed. How can I help? I'd like to make a small donation to the association's Emergency Relief Fund, but I want to do it from the right line item. In memory of someone. Your mother. Yes, I said, and I wonder if you might introduce me during the meeting. 30 seconds. I don't want to be a stranger with a check. That can be arranged, he said. Then he lowered his voice. Daniel's been wearing his halo tight lately. People notice when it pinches. I hung up knowing 2 beams had been subtly moved. Next came the witnesses. Not for the meeting for me. I drove to the church in the late afternoon when the light entering through the stained glass made the pews look like they were wearing borrowed jewels. I found Pastor Ruiz in his office, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, the smell of paper and old coffee in the air. He had baptized half the neighborhood's children, including Daniel's. He also knew my mother well enough to tell me when she'd skip service because she didn't want to cough through the homily. He stood when I entered. Marco, he said, and took both my hands in his, a habit I used to resist and now found disarming. I'm sorry about your mother. Thank you, I said. He watched my face the way a builder checks a level. You didn't come to the funeral. I was told I shouldn't. He nodded slowly, the line between brow and hair, a quiet map of disappointment survived. You were at her side more than anyone, he said. I saw you. That's not gossip. That's witness. I opened the folder and slid the lien agreement across his desk. I'm not here to make a scene, I said, but I'm going to move some furniture in a room where Daniel keeps his chairs stacked on other people's backs. I'd like you to say one sentence when I ask you. Nothing more. He read the document carefully, lips moving slightly, index finger following the lines like a prayer. Then he closed it and looked at me with a kind of soft pride. What sentence? That my mother's ramp was poured by my crew before sunrise the week after her stroke. That the cost wasn't the church's, as some believed. That you know who paid because you tried to reimburse me and I refused. He smiled. I did. And you did. Just that, I said. Only the truth, he said. And only if asked. Only if asked. He held my gaze. Do not let hatred build your house, he said. It won't, I said. It will only set the doors where they should have been. When I left, the church bells rang 6, and I let myself count them like a child. On 6, I made the second to last stop. Hospice. Nurse Albright met me outside under the underhang, where families smoke without judgment. She wore her badge on a purple lanyard and the kind of sneakers that look like mercy. Her eyes were tired in the way that means a person has earned their sleep. You were the quiet son, she said, and gave me a brief hug that somehow didn't presume. I need a favor, I said. If it helps someone, she replied. It helps the truth, I said. On the day my mother asked to feel the sky on her face, who called my office for the additional hours? Daniel's wife, she said, without hesitation. But your company card paid. You called me back within 5 minutes. You were on site before the sun came up. Would you be willing to say that if asked? By whom? She asked, and when I explained, she waited, then nodded. I won't enter any argument, she said, but I can answer a direct question, simply. Yes. Small, precise fasteners, each one turning with the right torque. I saved the hardest for last. Daniel. I didn't invite a conversation. I laid a condition. I sent a text that was not a warning, not a threat. A brace. Meeting at your association Tuesday. I'll be attending. I have a brief agenda item on elder care access and a donation in Ma's name. If you try to block it, I'll schedule a special session with the board and present a larger matter regarding disclosures. Your choice. See you there. Typing bubble. Pause. Typing. Pause. He wrote, keep it short. I replied, I'll use 2 minutes. What I didn't tell him was that those 2 minutes were not the exposure. They were the doorway into it. The exposure would be the room that everyone would find themselves standing in after the door closed. There were setbacks. There always are. The first came from Marjorie the next morning. Your brother has concerns about your presence, she said in a clipped message. He believes it will be disruptive and personal. It will be neither, I said. It will be civic and brief. I'm bringing a check and a sample permit packet for residents. We're a volunteer board, she said. We don't adjudicate family matters. Good, I said, because there is nothing to adjudicate. Silence stretched just long enough to let me imagine the exchange she had with Daniel. Then, we will keep you on the agenda at the start. 2 minutes. The second setback arrived subtle and almost comic. The office supply store was out of the heavyweight paper I preferred for exhibits. I bought what they had, a thinner stock that made copies look less official. It annoyed me more than it should have. Details matter. They always matter. But then I remember the watch on my wrist, losing time politely, inviting slowness. Perfection is a posture insecurity wears to avoid action. I printed the exhibits and put them in a simple black binder without tabs. No theatrics. Clean lines. Honest edges. I arranged my proofs in sequence and rehearsed the order like a witness statement. Not to accuse. To inform. To let the room do the math for me. People trust the sum more when they add it themselves. On the morning of the meeting, I found my mother's old rosary in a drawer I hadn't opened since the move. The beads were worn smooth by years of worry and relief. I put it in my pocket, not for prayer, but for the small sound it made when I shifted. A reminder of weight, of patience. I checked the watch. Let it be 2 minutes behind. I wanted nothing rushed. At noon, I met with Trevor the treasurer at a coffee shop near the Association Hall. He had a folder under his arm and a tight smile like he was trying to keep coffee from spilling on his life. I put you on the donation part, he said. It'll seem natural. I'll introduce you. 2 minutes is nothing. Daniel can handle 2 minutes. Thank you, I said. After my bit, I may ask a clarifying question. It will be a question anyone could answer. It may sound pointed. It will not be rude. He looked both relieved and disappointed, like a man who bought fire insurance and kind of wanted to see a controlled burn. Understood, he said. Then he leaned in. You know he's been telling people he built the ramp. I know, I said. Trevor glanced toward the door as if it could hear him. He'll hate this. I'm not doing it for him, I said. The Association Hall was a community room in the basement of a tidy brick building that always smelled faintly of gym floor and lemon cleaner. Rows of stackable chairs, a projector screen, a ragged American flag that had seen shinier rooms. People gathered with the purposefulness of those who believed in small mechanisms to keep their street decent. They nodded to one another with the affection of shared complaint. Daniel worked the room. Charisma set to 7. He touched shoulders, laughed at a volume calibrated to leadership, carried a clipboard like a prop. When he saw me, he paused, squinted, and pasted on a smile that didn't have the energy to reach his eyes. Marco, he said, extending his hand like a peace treaty you could frame. Thanks for your donation. Thanks for making space, I said, and we shook hands politely for the benefit of the audience we both understood. Marjorie called the meeting to order. She wore a blazer that turned her into a podium. Minutes were read. A motion was seconded. Treasurer's report. Then Trevor stood with his folder and glanced at me. We have a brief community item, he said. A resident family member wishes to share an update related to elder access and to make a donation in memory of A. Neighbor we all miss. Marco. I stood, walked to the front, and didn't take the mic. My voice carries when I want it to, and microphones make truth sound like spectacle. I set the black binder on the table, opened it to the first page, and looked at faces, not paper. My name is Marco Cortez, I said. My mother lived on Beechwood. Some of you knew her. Some of you were kind to her in small ways that mattered a lot. I'm here for 2 minutes to show what elder access looks like when a neighborhood knows how to help itself, and to leave behind a permit packet that anyone can copy to get a ramp poured quickly, safely, and legally. I turned the binder. First photo. The ramp at dawn, sun just thinking about it. Concrete smooth as a thought fully formed. I pointed to the permit stamped in the corner. This is a standard 1/12 slope with a non-slip finish, installed by licensed contractors before breakfast the week after stroke, I said. Cost can be a barrier, but there are ways to do this with community funds, private donations, church support, or family help. The goal is safe dignity. I kept my eyes moving. Faces were open. People like to learn something in rooms like this. It makes them feel their dues matter. Daniel stood near the back, arms crossed, smile stiff. I brought 10 packets, I went on. If you know an elder on your block who needs this, take one. If the association wants to keep a copy on file, I'll email it to Marjorie as well. And in my mother's name, I'm donating $5,000 to the Emergency Relief Fund to be used solely for elder access modifications. A murmur, not loud, pleased. Trevor blinked in a way numbers blink when they add up into something generous. Marjorie made a little satisfied V with her mouth that I suspect she didn't know about. Thank you, I said. One last thing. I let the room settle. The watch on my wrist breathed slow. Sometimes, when good things happen, we credit the nearest person with the biggest smile. It's human. But credits matter when they teach us how to repeat the good thing. So just for accuracy, when you tell the story of the ramp on Beechwood, say it this way: the church tried to pay. The association offered volunteers. A private donor covered labor and materials. That way, when someone else needs help, they'll know which doors to knock on. I closed the binder gently and stepped back. Marjorie, to her credit, understood what I had done. She seized the opening like a conductor who senses a solo in the room. Thank you, Marco, she said, for the donation and the practical guidance. Then she turned to the room. For clarity, can anyone from the church confirm their role in that project? I did not turn my head. I didn't need to. Pastor Ruiz had been waiting in the second row, quiet as a tool in its drawer. He stood. The church offered to pay, he said, speaking like rain. Marco refused. He and his crew poured the ramp before sunrise. We were grateful to witness it. There was a small, clean silence, the kind that happens when a story corrects its posture. Thank you, Pastor, Marjorie said, and she meant it. And can anyone speak to the hospice support on that case? Nurse Albright lifted her hand. Our agency handled care. Hours were added the day she asked to see the sky. Payment was covered by a private card within minutes. A whisper moved through the folding chairs like a breeze. I saw Daniel's jaw flex. He nodded once, heavily, as if agreeing to something tight in his neck. I didn't look at him. Not yet. I kept my attention on Marjorie, who had the scent of a person who just realized she was standing at the center of an honest thing. We appreciate factual clarity, she said. Thank you all. I returned to my seat. Trevor leaned over. That was surgical, he murmured. Then, with a tiny splash of humor, he is going to hate you and admire you for the same reasons. We moved through the rest of the agenda with the odd lightness that follows a small surgery gone well. 3 items later, as discussion drifted toward potholes and dog waste kiosks, I knew the room had done the math I came for. The story had been corrected in a place that fed Daniel's self-story. The first beam had flexed. Then Daniel asked for the floor. He didn't bother with the mic either. He stepped forward with his palm up and a smile designed for absolution. I want to thank Marco for his donation, he said, lifting his chin as if adjusting a crown he believed was welded on. We all want what's best for our elders. I just want to say that, as a family, we did the best we could for our mother together. He let together float for a second, then tossed in a soft laugh. Sometimes specifics get messy in grief. People nodded. They like the word together. It makes their chairs feel steadier. He had learned how to feed rooms with words that act like sugar. I stood. A quick point of order, I said. Since we're keeping records clear for future requests. Daniel, could you confirm that 4 winters ago, when the mortgage was in arrears, you repaid the party who covered it? The lien document requires acknowledgement before any transfer. His eyes snapped to me, clear, hostile, like glass introduced to flame. His wife, 2 rows back, froze. Marjorie turned, attentive. Is there a lien on the property in question? She asked, neutral. Exactly the right word. Property in question. She could have chaired a hearing. Daniel's smile thinned. Private family matters. Trevor coughed into his hand, a sound that meant he didn't enjoy lying even by omission. I held my palms open. We're all agreed on privacy, I said. I ask only because, as of last week's reading, the will requires the lien to be cleared before any sale. If the association anticipates community support for any elder access improvements, it's helpful to know the house is secure. People in rooms like this take house security personally. Values. Taxes. Code compliance. No one wants their association to be embarrassed by a foreclosure sign next to their pretty flag. Marjorie looked to Trevor. "Do we have any exposure as an association relative to the property?" she asked. "No," he said, steady. "However, clarity helps with grant eligibility. Families with secure titles are more likely to qualify." Daniel's lips parted and closed like a door, deciding whether to slam. "We'll handle it," he said finally. "That's all I needed to hear," I said and sat. The first exposure was complete. Not spectacular. Not cruel. Clean. The beam had given, and the creak traveled the room. After the meeting, people came up to shake my hand. Not many. Enough. The right ones. Marjorie held my gaze longer than politeness required. "Thank you for your specificity," she said. "It's refreshing." On my way out, Daniel intercepted me in the hall near the bulletin board advertising piano lessons and a lost orange cat named Captain. "You think this makes you noble?" he hissed, voice low, mouth smiling in case anyone looked. "Parading our business, coming to my meeting." "Your meeting?" I said. "Or the community's?" He poked a finger into my chest, not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to make a sound against the bone. "Stay out of my life." "You told me to stay out of a funeral," I said. "I did. This isn't your life. It's what you built on top of mine." He leaned closer. I could smell the mint gum he always chewed when he was pretending to be clean. "You think you know how to play rooms," he whispered. "But you forget something. People like me. They like stories about you," I said. "Same as you do." His eyes flashed. Then he smiled, tidy and dangerous. "You started something you can't control." "On the contrary," I said. "I designed it." He withdrew his hand. "You want a war," he said softly. "You'll get one." This was what I needed. Not the threat. The confession. Retaliation was coming. In a hybrid design, escalation is the hinge. You plan for it like engineers plan for wind shear. Anticipate the gust and turn the building's face into it. I turned and walked out into the winter air. The night was clean. A street light buzzed. The watch on my wrist ticked its slow, polite loss. 2 minutes behind. Just enough to remind me that speed is not the same as precision. At home, I took the binder apart and filed each page into a safe. I opened my mother's letter again and read the line about balance. Then I opened the envelope labeled "Only if you can't forgive." I hadn't planned to, not yet. But the hall, Daniel's finger on my chest, the word war spoken like a dare, it turned the paper in my hands as if it wanted to be read. Inside was not a lecture about kindness. It was a list. Names, dates, small loans I had forgotten, favors my mother had tracked like constellations. At the bottom, in her tight, careful script, one sentence. "If he tries to make you small, give him the size of the truth." I folded it back and slid it under the watch on my nightstand. The next morning, retaliation arrived on schedule. An email from a local blog that thrives on HOA gossip. Subject line: questions about donors' motives. The body was a polite smear, an anonymous tip alleging I was trying to buy influence in Daniel's association, that I was leveraging my mother's death for public credit, that there were questions about the legality of certain home modifications. It was clumsy, but in rooms built on perception, even clumsy can wobble a beam. I smiled. I had already laid out the next part of the plan for this exact gust. Stage 2 wouldn't be in a basement with folding chairs. Stage 2 would be sunlight, public records, county clerk, clean copies, chain of custody. And one meeting, Daniel couldn't control a quiet sit-down at his bank with a loan officer who owed me a favor because I kept a project on schedule after a flood made his life a living audit. I texted Trevor 3 words: expect documents Friday. Then I texted Daniel. Wind only hurts buildings that lie about their weight. He didn't reply. By noon, I had set 3 appointments. County clerk to pull certified copies of the lien and release clause. Hospice to get a simple letter on letterhead confirming who paid. The bank to request a courtesy letter acknowledging the loan cure 4 winters ago by a private party. No amounts disclosed. Small fasteners. Right torque. No theatrics. I ordered a single poster board with 1 image, the ramp at dawn, and at the bottom a line in plain font. Dignity has a slope. We built it. The trap was set the moment I chose to make the truth boring and undeniable. Daniel would shout. I would file. He would smear. I would certify. He would gather friends. I would gather records. Controlled collapse does not look like drama. It looks like gravity remembering its job. The watch on my wrist lost its 2 minutes by evening. I set it back. Not because I needed accuracy, because ritual is how you tell your body the plan is working. When I finally lay down, I thought of beams of wind, of rooms that change when you shift a single line in the drawing. I thought of my mother's hands. I thought of the meeting, the way the air changed when the pastor stood, when the nurse spoke. I thought of Daniel's finger at my chest and the way he whispered war. And I smiled in the dark not because I wanted destruction, but because I had learned, after a lifetime of being the invisible beam, how to choose where the structure fails. Next came execution, and the building would come down exactly where I told it to. The smear post only lived for an hour before the comments turned against it. Not because people loved me, because the math didn't add up. Anonymous sources are loud until paper speaks. I made paper speak. By mid-morning, I had 3 certified copies from the county clerk, each stamped with a crest that makes clerks sit straighter and liars shorter. The lien, the release conditions, and the recorded sale of the Rayner lot in my mother's name 12 years ago. The clerk slid them under the glass with a bored efficiency that felt like justice's less glamorous cousin. You want extra certified copies? She asked. 4 of each, I said. And a receipt. I left with a folder that felt heavier than its weight. Gravity works harder for documents that can't be argued with. The bank was next. Not Daniel's bank, mine, which had learned to respect schedules when I made a construction draw arrive at 6:59 a.m. on a holiday. I didn't sit in the lobby. I went straight to a second-floor conference room where a loan officer named Choi waited with a legal pad and the posture of a man who had recently decided to stop apologizing for being right. You said 15 minutes, he said. I'll need 10, I replied, and placed the county-certified lien on the table. 4 winters ago, a delinquency was cured by a private party. 2 weeks ago, the borrower attempted to refinance without disclosing this lien. I'm not asking you to violate any privacy. I am asking if your compliance team wants to be the last to know when this hits daylight. He didn't touch the paper. Loan officers are learned around paper. He read it with his eyes and his training. We flagged the application, he said eventually. Debt to income barely fits. Their disclosures were optimistic. He tapped his pen twice. This lien changes our posture. I don't want a war with your client, I said. I want the terms obeyed. The will requires satisfaction of the lien prior to any transfer or refinance. Failure to disclose creates risk for you too. He nodded. We'll issue a conditions letter, he said. No refinance without lien satisfaction and proof of origin. If we discover misrepresentation, underwriting can withdraw. And if an application is made elsewhere, well, the file notes will speak for themselves when we're called for verification. He closed his pad. Was she a good mother? He asked, unexpected, like a soft step in a steel room. She did everything she could, I said. He stood. Then it should end properly. I thanked him and left with a polite email in my inbox before I hit the sidewalk. Subject: Conditional requirements, Beechwood Refi. The kind of note that doesn't raise its voice because it never has to. Wave 1, Documents. Wave 2 arrived at the speed of gossip. The HOA blog changed its post title to a question mark, then added a note saying, "New information received." It linked to the association's own minutes, where thanks to Marjorie, my donation and permit packet were listed plainly, the pastor's sentence included, the nurse's sentence included. Facts are not sexy, but they travel when you put shoes on them. I texted Trevor, "Expect something from First Harbor's underwriting. Read carefully." He replied with a single word, "Copy." By late afternoon, Daniel's wife posted a photo of a casserole with a caption about haters. People who need applause always mistake it for oxygen. I didn't comment. I prepared. The next move wasn't mine. It was Trevor's. And because he's the kind of man who keeps receipts like prayers, it came with quiet thunder. He called at 6, voice steady. "We were about to finalize the quarter," he said. "Your situation made me check reimbursements tied to elder care assistance from last year." He paused. Daniel filed for $3,217.14. Said it was supplies for the ramp and access modifications. The receipts are from a big box store. They include a patio set and a propane grill. He didn't accuse. He just read numbers. I said nothing for a beat, long enough to feel my jaw relax rather than clench. "Treasurer," I said, deliberately using his title. "That's an internal matter. But if your board seeks clarity, a certified letter from hospice, and the church will state no association funds were used on the ramp, you can release those at your discretion." Silence. Then he exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man seeing the shape of a thing he'd rather not. "I'll call a special session," he said. "We do this on the record." "Make it public," I said. "Sunlight helps." It was on. 2 days later, the notice went out. Special HOA session audit clarifications and community standards. Daniel hadn't wanted it. You could taste the reluctance in the way the email called it a clarification rather than what it was, an audit. Between the notice and the meeting, the escalation continued like I had drawn it. First Harbor sent Daniel the conditions letter. He forwarded it to the treasurer, by accident, a mistake that happens when panic presses send in the wrong room. Trevor texted me, a screenshot cropped to protect the bank rep's name, but not the content. No refinance, without lien satisfaction, and proof of clearing party. In the margin, Daniel had written, "What is this lien?" By then, it wasn't a secret. It was a wall. You could decorate it or deny it, but it wouldn't move. I didn't attend the preliminary scuffle. Daniel stormed into Marjorie's office with his clipboard and his charisma and demanded the session be closed to protect the dignity of the family. She said dignity prefers bright rooms. He accused me of leveraging tragedy for attention. She pointed to the bylaws that require open sessions when funds are discussed. He hated bylaws the way bullies hate rulers. They measure accurately. The morning of the session, I did 3 things my old foreman would have called overkill, and I now call craft. First, I pulled a certified chain of title for the house. Simple, sterile, brutal. It read like a family story stripped of adjectives. Deed to my mother mortgage, delinquency cured, lien recorded. Will stipulation. Second, I requested and obtained from hospice a 1-paragraph letter on letterhead that answered exactly one question. Who paid? It named my company card and the date. Nothing else. No editorial. Paper needs no adjectives when it's wearing a logo and a signature. Third, I wrote one sentence on a single sheet of paper in 16-point type. Dignity has a slope. We built it. I slid that sheet behind the first photo of the ramp in my binder, so that if anyone flipped pages in a hurry, they would see words that could not be argued with or mocked. I arrived early and sat in the second row, not the front. I wanted faces in front of me, not empty air. The room filled with neighbors who believed meetings keep the world from slipping. A kid in a soccer uniform sat sideways in his chair, listening because children know when adults are about to drop masks. The pastor took a seat by the wall. The nurse sat near the back, hands folded like she was waiting for a patient to breathe easier. Daniel entered late, harried, a man rehearsing lines in his head. He shook 3 hands, avoided mine, then took his spot beside Marjorie with a smile he had polished in the car. Marjorie opened with the tight-lipped dignity of a woman who could run a small country if given a day and a stapler. "We have 2 items," she said. First, Treasurer's clarifications on reimbursements. Second, an update on disclosures relevant to home equity and association grants. We remain grateful to our donors. We remain committed to transparency. She nodded to Trevor. He stood, unfolded a single sheet, and in a voice that had only recently decided it could be firm, read, "In the last quarter, a reimbursement of $3,217.14 was issued for elder care modifications at a member's family home. Receipts provided include a patio set and a propane grill. No receipts reflect ramps, handrails, or ADA-compliant materials. Hospice and church letters in the file state their services and funds were not used. A private donor covered the ramp. Therefore, I recommend the reimbursement be reversed and the funds returned to the emergency relief line within 10 business days." He looked up. The room breathed in as one. Daniel smiled as if he were indulging a child's misunderstanding. "We used the grill for a fundraiser," he said. "You're welcome." Trevor didn't blink. "There was no motion authorizing grill purchase," he said. "And the photos from the event show it at your home." Daniel spread his hands, palms up. "We like to be hospitable." Marjorie tapped the gavel lightly. "We can debate hospitality later," she said. "For now, the treasurer has recommended reversal of the reimbursement. Is there a second?" "Second," said a woman I didn't know, eager, almost grateful for a rule to hold. "All in favor?" Marjorie asked. Hands rose. "Not all." "Enough." Daniel's smile cracked and showed the teeth underneath. "Motion carries," she said. "Funds to be returned within 10 business days." He leaned into his mic. "This is a witch hunt." "It's accounting," she replied, and people laughed not at him, at the relief of hearing a thing named. "Second item," she said. "Disclosures relevant to home equity and grants." She looked directly at me and then down at her agenda like nothing in particular was about to happen. "Mr. Cortez has provided certified documents." I stood, opened my folder, and placed the chain of title on the table facing the room. "This is the chain of title for 118 Beechwood," I said. "It reflects a lien recorded 4 winters ago when delinquency was cured by a private party. The will stipulates the lien must be satisfied prior to any sale or transfer. A refinance application triggered a conditions letter from First Harbor requiring lien satisfaction. A hospice letter confirms elder care was privately paid. The church confirms it attempted to reimburse and was declined." I did not look at Daniel. I looked at the room. When you redesign a space, you don't argue with a single beam. You address the entire structure. These facts are being presented because the association accepts donations for elder access under the assumption that homes are secure and disclosures honest. This is not about shame. It is about preventing waste, fraud, and the quiet rot that comes when stories replace records. I slid the hospice letter forward. The letterhead caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in an official, merciless way. Daniel finally stood, "This is harassment," he said, and his voice carried the first true heat of the night. "My family is grieving. He's leveraging grief to control the narrative." He jabbed a finger at me. He didn't even come to the funeral. I kept my hands at my sides. "You asked me not to." He flinched. Then he regrouped. "It's a family matter," he insisted. "The lien is between us. The bank can handle it. The association has no jurisdiction." Marjorie steepled her fingers. "We have jurisdiction over how we accept and represent donations," she said. "If a board member solicits funds or goodwill on the basis of an inaccurate narrative, that is our business." He faced the room. "Who here doubts what I've done for this neighborhood?" he demanded. No one answered. That was worse than a no. Silence is what happens when a room starts moving a chair away from the table in its mind. I took the last page in my binder and held it up only for a moment, the photo of the ramp at dawn, the sentence beneath. "Dignity has a slope. We built it." Then I set it down. "I'm not asking anyone to doubt anything," I said. "I'm asking everyone to read." It would have ended there a tidy reputational correction and a reversed reimbursement if not for the email that arrived on Marjorie's tablet while we stood there. She glanced down, blinked, then blinked again. She turned the screen slightly, just enough for Trevor to see. He inhaled as if the room had tilted. "What is it?" Daniel asked, too quick. Guilt knows when the room changes temperature. Marjorie cleared her throat. "A note from First Harbor," she said. "Addressed to the borrower. Carbon copied to the treasurer because of a prior missend." She looked up at Daniel. "It states that the refinance application is withdrawn for cause due to failure to disclose a recorded lien and inconsistencies in stated income on line 12. It also notes that a courtesy alert has been placed in the file for verification requests from other lenders." He went pale in a way that isn't theatrical. The kind of pale your blood makes when it realizes it bet wrong. "My income is," he began. "Not our business," she said, protecting him without saving him. "But when you present your home as a symbol of stability in this room, it becomes relevant if it is in jeopardy due to misrepresentation." "Misrepresentation is a strong word," he said weakly. "It's their word," she said. "Not ours." There was a long, quiet breath from the entire room. The kid in the soccer uniform stared at Daniel the way kids stare at falling things, terrified and fascinated. He turned to me, eyes hot. He mouthed a single word. "Why?" I could have listed reasons like inventory. The towels folded like apologies. The decades of calls for help that came with a tone that assumed a yes. The funeral I didn't attend. The letter in my pocket that said you don't have to keep doing it. But I didn't owe the room my reasons. I owed the room clean angles. "For the record," I said, "my lien can be satisfied with a payment plan. I will not force a sale, but I will not erase the fact of it. The will requires it. My mother deserves it. And the association deserves honesty when it prints pamphlets about who did what." It was, finally, too much balance for him to bear. He lunged in words, not hands. "You think you're a hero," he snapped. "You're a checkbook with a God complex. You always needed people to owe you." I felt steel inside me shift and lock. "No," I said softly. "I needed to stop pretending I owed you my silence." Marjorie tapped the gavel, not to silence me, but to return us to the rules. "We are adjourned on this item," she said. "Treasurer will process the reversal. Mr. Cortez, please submit copies for the record. Mr. Daniel," and here she did a human thing, a gentle thing, "you have 10 business days to return the funds. As for your loan, that is between you and your bank." The meeting ended not with applause or shouting, but with chairs pushed back carefully. People filed out, speaking in low tones, as if a storm had passed and they were inspecting their fences. The pastor squeezed my shoulder as he left. The nurse gave me a small nod, the kind you give a patient whose fever finally broke. I stayed until the room was mostly empty. Daniel stood alone at the front, staring at nothing. I walked up and set a small white envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, suspicious. "A payment plan," I said. "Terms in writing. 12 months, no interest. You satisfy the lien, the condition clears, you keep the house. You pay back the association's reimbursement, you keep your treasurer off your back. You correct the bank file. They may reconsider in 6 months if your income supports it. I've already told Choi I won't oppose it." He stared. "Why would you?" "Because I'm not interested in your collapse as a spectacle," I said. "Only in the architecture being true." He picked up the envelope with a hand that shook minutely. "And if I don't sign?" "Then the lien stays until sale," I said. "If you try to transfer without clearing it, your buyer's title company will stop you. If you try to refinance elsewhere without disclosure, the conditions letter exists. It follows you. Gravity will do its job." His jaw worked. Then he laughed, a sound without joy. "You designed this." "I did. You made me look like a thief." "You made yourself look like a thief when you filed for a grill under eldercare," I said. "I just turned on the lights." He swallowed. The pride that had carried him like a raft started taking on water. 12 months, he said dully. 12, I confirmed. "Begin with the association. Then the lien. Then your life." He looked at me for a long time. "You could have destroyed me," he said quietly. And for the first time, there was no accusation in it. Just comprehension. "I could have," I said. "I chose not to. Don't make me regret that." He slid the envelope into his jacket and walked past me, smaller than when he had entered. Outside, his wife waited with a face like glass. When he reached for her hand, she hesitated, then gave it. There are 100 ways to fall. Not all of them are visible. I carried the binder home like a tool I'd used properly. I set it on the table, opened my mother's letter, and read the lines she wrote about balance until the words felt like furniture that would not tip. Financial downfall isn't a crash in a story like this. It's a series of mechanisms clicking into the positions they were designed for. Loan withdrawn, audit reversal, lien terms, public record. No door slams. The building just remembers which way is down. I stood on my balcony, the city's breath slow and even, the river dark. I checked the watch. It was 2 minutes behind again. I didn't correct it. I let it teach. Tomorrow, I would deliver the certified copies to the association's clerk for the record. Tomorrow, Trevor would send a friendly but formal invoice for the reimbursement. Tomorrow, the bank's file would begin to cool. Tonight, I allowed myself one small victory. I called the family friend who had sent the funeral photo without a message. When she answered, I said, "Thank you for the picture." I kept it. She sighed, relieved to be included in the right story. "Your mother would have been proud today," she said. "Not of the fight, of the clean." "Me too," I said and meant it. The exposure was done. The retaliation had been absorbed. The financial blow had landed, not with noise, but with weight. What remained was aftermath. And I had one final thing to build, a life that didn't require me to carry other people's beams. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful quiet, like the air after demolition when the dust hasn't settled yet, and everyone's still deciding how to breathe again. Daniel signed the payment plan. 12 months, no interest. The association received the reimbursement in full within a week. Trevor sent me a copy of the deposit slip without commentary. Marjorie added a single line to the next meeting minutes. Reimbursement reversed. Lien acknowledged. Disclosure requirements clarified. No drama. Just clean lines. The bank file was updated. Daniel's refinance was dead. His fallback lender found the courtesy alert in the system and backed away before issuing terms. For the first time in his life, Daniel had to live without the safety net I'd woven beneath him for decades. Watching him adjust was like watching someone learn how to walk on their own legs after years in a borrowed car. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. Not gossip documentation. Trevor sent an anonymized treasurer's note to the HOA email list explaining the corrected reimbursement and the updated grant procedures. Pastor Ruiz mentioned during a Sunday homily that truth builds stronger houses than stories. The nurse told me one afternoon she'd had 2 families ask how to get a ramp installed, like the one on Beechwood. I didn't reply to Daniel's few late-night texts. They weren't apologies. They were attempts to pull me back into the old roles: fixer, explainer, buffer. I let them pass like wind against a sealed window. For once, I wasn't the one holding the beams. One Saturday, I drove by the house. He was on the porch alone, staring at the ramp. No neighbors, no clipboard, no audience. He looked like a man finally meeting the structure beneath his life and realizing it had someone else's fingerprints all over it. I parked, got out, and walked up the gravel path that hadn't changed since I was a boy. He didn't stand. He didn't sneer. He just asked, "Why didn't you destroy me?" I leaned against the porch rail. "Because that's not what this was about," I said. "It was about making the weight visible. About letting gravity do its job." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that comes from exhaustion, not agreement. I didn't know about half of it. "You didn't want to know," I corrected gently. "You liked the story better when it was yours." He laughed once, bitter and small. "You were always the one holding it all together. And you were always the one pretending that meant it was easy," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The winter lights settled on the ramp, soft and honest. He finally said, "I'll pay it. All of it." "I know," I said. "I left him there not broken, but without illusions. Some collapses don't end in rubble. They end in clarity." At home, I opened my mother's letter one last time. The edges were worn now, the ink softened by fingers and memory. I traced the line. "You do not have to keep doing it." She'd been right. I didn't. I poured a cup of coffee and stood on my balcony, watching the river move like time itself, steady, indifferent, honest. The city hummed below me. Somewhere in those streets, Daniel was learning what beams feel like when they're no longer invisible. This story didn't end with police sirens or slammed doors. It ended with documents, signatures, quiet reversals, and a house that finally told the truth about who held it up all these years. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a folder sliding across a table, a gavel tapping once, a bank letter arriving at the exact right moment. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to stay silent anymore. I adjusted the watch on my wrist. 2 minutes behind, like always. I left it that way. Not every imperfection needs fixing. I turned back inside, leaving the balcony door open to let the cold air in. It felt clean. What would you have done in my place? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more stories.